Noon, Karen.
Hi, David. Nice to be here again today.
Always a pleasure to share these broadcasts with you. My name is David Cope, and I'm a founder of a New Life Center with my partner, Peggy Litt. I got involved in relationships and creating relationship courses because I got divorced in the year 2000, and my life was crushed, and I always imagined myself living happily ever after. But I found out that my marriage ended and I had to find a new way, and wanted to make sure as I looked into my future that I would have a loving and intimate relationship with another woman sometime in my future. And it was really important to me. And in this process of learning how to have a loving and intimate relationship, I found out that I first had to have an intimate relationship with myself. And over the last 15 years, I've been teaching others and myself how to have relationships with themselves so they can have an intimacy with themselves, and then bring that into a relationship and share that with a partner. Karen, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you got
Absolutely.
involved?
Of course. I'm Karen Seitz, and I am the lead teacher at a New Life Center for the relationship course that we offer. And I came into a New Life Centers program about 4 years ago. And one of the areas in my life where I struggled the most, and quite frankly, was falling apart, was my marriage.
Hmm.
And so I have been with my husband almost 10 years, and we've been married about 4 years. So the problems in our marriage really began to surface from the very beginning. And very quickly after getting married, my husband and I were already headed towards divorce. And the real issue was I had no relationship with myself. I didn't know who I was. So by working on that and that alone, I've rekindled the connection in my marriage with my husband. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching this, because it works and it's unlike anything else out there.
Thank you, Karen. Can you
Mhm.
take a moment and just review the three fundamental principles that we teach at a New Life Centers relationship class and as a foundation of our Facebook group?
Sure. The principles for our Facebook group and what we teach in our relationship program. The first one is that you are 100% responsible for your happiness, which means that there's nothing that your husband can do or stop doing that's going to make you happy. You have to be willing to look in yourself and find that happiness inside of you. The second principle that we follow is you're the only person that you can change. Your husband can't change you, your family can't change you, and nothing that they do to change is going to change your experience. If you want long lasting, permanent change, it has to come from inside of you, and you have to do the work to do that. And that leads into our third principle, which is that authentic intimacy is actually about knowing who you are and having a relationship with yourself. And what we know and what I've seen in myself and what I teach my clients to do, that the only way to know who I am and have a relationship with myself and feel good about me, which is what real intimacy is, I have to be willing to pick up the rug and look underneath it and find all the ways that I'm making myself unhappy and all the ways that I don't feel good about myself. And by doing that, I deepen the connection with me, which then I can bring into my marriage or any relationship. But it has to start with me. I think that's the foundation of everything we're teaching and the perspective that we're sharing. It's all down to me.
Hmm. Thank you, Karen.
Mhm.
So one of the nice things about a New Life Center and our relationship course is it's based upon research and study and working over the years with women at a very deep level, uncovering some of the hidden aspects of themselves that they themselves often suppress into their unconscious. So we're going to talk about some of those today. The title of our broadcast is see. Why you wake up wondering how you got into this marriage you're in. Well, how you ever got into this marriage.
Yeah.
So it just kind of ties in with the broadcast we did, Karen, on being a victim. And
Yes.
sometimes what happens when we're married, we wake up realizing we don't really realize how we got to where we were in the marriage, that we had this fairy tale, living happily ever after, and had marriage vows about being with our best friend and having a good time and never going to sleep angry and always talking things through. But over time, what happens is we grow further and further apart. And the distance sometimes is really hard, because at one time we believed we were in love with our partners, and it kind of dissipates over time. And we sometimes wonder how we got to where we are. So some of the research and study we've done is an interesting perspective on why some women actually get married. And part of taking responsibility for yourself and your marriage is realizing some of the reasons why you might have gotten married, which none of was that because you loved this person and you wanted to live happily ever after with them. Karen, can you share some of the research that we've discovered over the years about why women actually get married?
Sure. And I also just want to say these reasons that we choose to get married, these choices that we're making, are largely unconscious. We don't ever take the time to look at them or see them because we don't want to, because it would expose us. So these are the things that are hiding out that we're doing, and we have no idea that they're even there. And so that's why we got to take the time to look at them if we really want to turn things around and have the chance of saving our marriage and having a healthy marriage. So in my work with clients, and also in my own work with myself, some of these unconscious reasons of why as women we get married, for me it was, and I didn't know this until I took the time to look at it and had someone help me look at it, was I didn't think that, I thought, well, I should put it this way. I thought the only way that I could fulfill my purpose as a woman was to get married and have children. And that was the real reason that I got married. And I see that come up time and time again with my clients. Actually, just came up last night. I was working with a client who recently got out of a long-term relationship. And part of her process to heal is looking at why she made the choice to get in that relationship in the first place. And straight out of her mouth, my biological clock was ticking, and I needed to find someone to have kids with. And that's why she got in that relationship. Some of the other issues that we know are really common and we see time and time again is we don't want to be alone. That's a huge reason that we get married and find ourselves in long-term relationships, is because we don't want to be alone. Another is we want to be taken care of. And what I knew in myself and what I see with my clients is we have a really hard time seeing that one, that as women at this fundamental level, we really want to be taken care of, because we like to think in our story about who we are that we're progressive, strong, independent women, and I don't need anyone to take care of me. But when we start to dig, and like I said, pull the rug up and look underneath it, there's a very strong part of us as women that we will really want to be taken care of. And so we get married or get into a long-term relationship with these hidden reasons hanging out underneath, and we wonder why our marriage or our relationship isn't working out.
Another one, just a little bit more clear, that came up in our research is the biological clock is a very big one. Mm-hmm. And often women will say they married the man that they were with, that they fell in love with at that time. And another reason often we run into why women get married is because they want to have children. And they find the husband in their biological timing so that they can have children. And all of these things that we're mentioning just make us human. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. That's kind of like being a victim. All humans at their foundation are victims because the way the mind works, we want to blame everything outside of ourselves for the experience that we have. So when you realize that you might have gotten married for a reason which is not fundamentally because I'm deeply in love with this person and I want to commit to making my marriage work over the long term. That's why sometimes you wake up and realize, oh my gosh, how did I get into this mess of a marriage? And how did I end up with this man who isn't there, is distant and cold, and I can't get him to do anything. And I'm always a nag and feel like I have another child running around the house. And it's really because we don't realize at some level the true reasons why we got married. Karen, there's another piece that often happens, we found out in our research, that causes women to wonder how they got into their marriage and why their marriage has such a big gap in intimacy is sometimes I call the chameleon, is how women become who they think they need to be in order to get the man to marry them. Could you share a little bit about what you found out about yourself and
that
working with your clients?
Yes. For me in my life, I had made being in a relationship the most important thing. I convinced myself if I'm just in a relationship or if I just have a partner or a boyfriend for when I was younger, then all these problems I have, how I feel bad about myself, all those things will go away. So that was always my number one priority, was find the relationship. So as soon as I met a man, or even when I was younger, when I met, a boy I went to school with or whatever the case was, I immediately, because I was so desperate for that relationship to fill that void inside of myself, I immediately became who I thought I needed to be to get the relationship, to get the man's attention, to get him to want me. And so I became that person I thought I had to be. And how I did it was, and I comes up time and time again with my clients too, it's very common, is I adopted all of their hobbies and all of their likes. If they liked it, then, oh, I love that too, without even a second thought. So with my first boyfriend, he loved indie rock, and he loved poetry. Knowing myself now, I don't really like poetry. I don't understand it in the way that some people can. And I like classic rock and other kinds of music, but I took on what he liked so that because I thought that's how I would get him. And in my second relationship, he was really into hip hop. So then I was really into hip hop, and he was really into souping up his car and getting speakers and subwoofers. So what was I into? Well, I love that too. With my husband, we're based out of Denver, Colorado, and there's a lot of very tall mountains that we call 14ers because they're 14,000 foot mountains. And he loved hiking 14ers. So when he asked me, hey, do you like hiking? My immediate response was, I love hiking. That's my favorite thing. I had been hiking one time when I was 5 years old, and when I lived in Tennessee, so the elevation was about 500 feet above sea level. That's the only time I'd ever been hiking, but it just almost automatically came out of my mouth. I love hiking. So I began hiking 14ers and doing all the things that he liked to do. So like David said, I was a total chameleon. Whoever I needed to be, then that's who I was going to become. And it links into that lack of intimacy, because as soon as I immerse myself in somebody else's likes and hobbies, I completely disconnect from who I am. Mm-hmm. And the fundamental problem for me was I never knew who I was, because I was so obsessed with getting a relationship that's all I cared about. I never took the time to get to know myself and then bring the real me into a relationship. If I had, then I would have felt confident and strong in myself. And if that wasn't a connection, I would have valued myself to know this isn't the right relationship for me. But we don't have a way to look at that because we haven't been taught.
Thank you, Karen. So
Sure.
it's a really good way for women to understand one way in which why they feel so disconnected from their husband and often crave intimacy because they never developed a relationship with themselves. They in the case that you're talking about a chameleon, they became who they needed to become in order for the man to love them or to become the person who they needed to be to get married. And I know in their research and over the years, we've actually had women share that they know how to make a man fall in love with them.
Yeah.
And that they do the things that so they can get the man. And again, as Karen mentioned, most of this is at an unconscious level. And the reason why we're talking about it is because we've done the research and study, we're able to work with women at a much deeper foundational level than some of the superficial things and the band-aid approaches that are out there. Like, well, we struggle with communication, or we just don't understand each other's needs. But underneath all of that is really a disconnection from ourselves. And we've talked about why that happens is because we put up walls around our heart because we get hurt and we don't want to have the pain of letting somebody in. So we live with our walls up and putting our hands out and pushing everybody away, afraid to let people in. So intimacy and the lack of intimacy comes from a lot of sources. And today we're focusing on the one which is we don't even know who we are because we become somebody else in order to be married, and we lose ourselves in our marriage, and that disconnection is what causes the intimacy, not your husband. And that's part of our program is reconnecting to yourself so you build a relationship with yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to make another comment, David, if that's okay, that the other piece that I did besides being a chameleon and showing up as who I thought I needed to be is I also put on my rose-colored glasses or my fantasy glasses and saw my husband as who I wanted him to be. I painted this grandiose picture of who I thought that he was, so that in the beginning of our relationship, as red flags came up, or I saw parts of him that maybe I didn't like or were hard for me to accept, I could completely sweep under the rug and justify because my eyes were set on the end goal of getting married and having children. So I didn't even see him for who he is. And then I get into this relationship and, secretly I'm thinking, well, I'll change those things. I'll get him to change those things. Yeah. And that's absurd. And that's where we have to take responsibility for the person we chose to marry or get into a relationship. I have to take responsibility and be willing to see that I knew who he was. And I'm very fortunate. I'm married to a really good man, but he has his flaws and issues too. We all do as humans, but we don't stop to think about, am I going to be able to accept this, him for who he is? Because we're so set on what we secretly want or desire.
Thank you, Karen. That kind of is a good segue into the concept that we want to talk about today. The constructive part is when you wake up and wonder, how did I get into this marriage? The opposite of being a victim is to take responsibility. And most people never stop and realize and take responsibility that I'm the one that decided to marry this person. I'm the one that chose to get married. I'm the one that is choosing to be in the marriage. And taking responsibility is at such a fundamental level. It really goes to nobody's making me stay in this marriage. And when I realize that nobody's making me stay, then it's my choice to stay in the marriage. And when you begin to take responsibility for your choices to be in the marriage, and at such a deeper level, often many of your problems can go away because you no longer are a victim thinking that your husband is doing things to you. When you shift your perspective at a deep enough level and say, look, I'm the one that chose to get married. I'm the one that chose to have children. And nobody made me do that. And the life that I have is the life that I created. Often, if we take ownership at a fundamental level, that many of our problems begin to go away because we're taking the responsibility for our choice to be in the marriage rather than thinking somehow we just happen to come into this marriage with this person and we're unhappy and miserable in ourselves and our marriage and somehow this is happening to us. But the important fundamental concept here is that nobody's making you be in this marriage. And if you are staying, it's because you're choosing to stay. Whatever reasons that you have to stay, it's your choice. When you can make that at a deep enough level, it allows you to have a much greater sense of acceptance for who you are and the choices you've made and the life that you created. And also, it begins to be projected also onto your husband in a constructive way is, you know what, I chose him and I knew what I was getting into. If I chose to not to see the things that I knew were there, I still decided not to see them. And this is the man that I married. And I can begin to choose now to see the things that I actually love about him and focus on the things that are the good parts of him. Because when you are committed to your marriage, meaning I'm take responsibility for my choice to be in this marriage, what happens is you begin to see all the things that are going well in your marriage or all the positive things about your husband because your mind wants to reinforce that you've taken responsibility and you've chosen to be in this marriage. And that's a deep commitment where you will be seeking to find the things about your husband that are really good and wonderful and kind. And often when I begin to work with women in this shift, I ask them to tell me about one of the best qualities about their husband. And they'll say, well, he really is a very kind and caring man. And then they go, and yeah, but he doesn't do the finances, and he drinks too much on the weekends, and he never does the chores, and I have to treat him like a kid. And I will say, wait a minute, do you realize what you said, that you have a good man who is kind and loving to you, and that's not important enough for you, that all these other things seem to surface? So when we take responsibility at a deep enough level that we've made, it's our choice to be in the marriage, we make a deeper commitment to ourselves in the marriage and we begin to see the things that we really like about our husband. When we're not committed to our marriage and we're a victim and we want to blame our husband, what we do, the mind seeks to validate how unhappy we are and that the source of our unhappiness is our husband. So the mind will seek everything they can to substantiate all the behaviors about your husband that's causing you to be unhappy and to be wished you were in a different marriage. And you focus on all of his faults and all of his shortcomings. And before you know it, that's all you can see. And that's when the mind begins to say, if he would only change, then I'd be happy. But what we realize, if we can take responsibility at a fundamental level, that we made the choice to get married. We made the choice to get married to the person that you're with. And that we do that at a fundamental level, we can become committed to work through the problems and begin to shift and see the positive things about our husband. And it's quite remarkable how that can happen when we take responsibility at a deep enough level.
That was really clear, David. That was great. It was. Yeah.
Good. You never know what comes out.
Never know what's going to come out in these pods.
So Karen, can you kind of give an overview of what's the message that we're trying to give to the women in our Facebook group and the people listening?
Well, I think that really the bottom line of what today's video is about is when we don't slow down to look at the real choices that we made to get in our marriage or get in a relationship, those hidden underlying desires and wants we have that we talked about, like not wanting to be alone, or wanting to have children, wanting to be taken care of. For me, it was thinking that to fulfill my purpose as a woman, I had to get married and have children. And that when those things are going on in our relationship and we can't see them, we're not taking responsibility for ourselves, and that no one made us get into our marriage. We made those choices and we chose to be with the person that we're with. And when we can look at that and, like David said, truly learn how to take responsibility for those choices and our choice to be in our marriage or relationship, then we can settle in and begin to do the work to change ourselves and take responsibility for our happiness. And a wonderful thing begins to happen. I stop projecting all my problems and how I feel about myself onto my husband, which then frees me up to see all the wonderful and good things about him. When I'm stuck in that place of victim and blaming, that's all I can see, are the things that I'm angry and, pardon my language, pissed off at my husband for. Mm-hmm. And I just reinforce that in myself again and again until I see no way out and I feel trapped. So when I commit and say, you know what, this is the person I chose to marry, I want to do everything I can to make this work for me, then I can begin to open myself up and do the work. And I begin to see my husband in a whole new light and my marriage in a whole new light. And that's how I turn things around. And that's what we're talking about today.
Thank you, Karen.
Sure.
I appreciate your summary. And just as Karen often says, these behaviors that you're experiencing are just normal human behaviors. And part of what we do at A New Life Center is to normalize your experience in your marriage and realize that even though you look around at other couples that are cuddling in the corner at the restaurant or walking hand in hand and seem like they're having this wonderful marriage, is that on average, most couples are experiencing something very similar to you. And we know that the number one problem in marriages for women is a lack of intimacy. So it's really good to remind yourself that most women share this common problems that you do, and you didn't lose out and you didn't have a good role model, so you don't know how to be in a marriage, or nobody taught you how to be happy, and all the things our mind wants to convince us is no, you're just human, and these are the ways in which the mind works to create relationships, and that everything you're experiencing is normal. And that's the beauty of it. If you had these problems, which our mind wants to often tell us, oh, you don't understand, my problems are much worse than everybody else's, then they become unsolvable. So at A New Life Center, what we do is normalize our experiences, so we begin to know that everybody else is having the same thing, and that all these challenges and issues are very common. And that's why how we address them at A New Life Center, at a fundamental nature of our being human, and work at a very deep level to shift our perspective of how we feel about ourselves by building a relationship with us, which shifts your marriage in not only how you see your husband, your children, your family members, and your life changes dramatically. So thank you, Karen, so much for sharing this with me. As always, I know how passionate you are about doing this work. And at A New Life Center, we all are what I call true teachers. And thank you, Karen, for doing your work and taking this work into your marriage every day and facing the challenges that you have, so that you know that you're a living example of this work and how the work can do. And can you wrap up for us?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And, I just want to remind our listeners, this stuff is really hard to get to on our own. I couldn't be where I am in my marriage. I could not have made the shifts that I made and be experiencing my life in this fresh, alive way that I am without someone teaching me how to take responsibility and how to look at the unconscious choices that I made when I got married, and to look at these things that I'm hiding from myself. That's the very nature of the mind, is we won't let ourselves go there. And I read 100 books. That's not an exaggeration. I was a book addict. I read 100 books. I went to talk therapy. I did all the things and nothing changed. This program was the only thing that worked for me. And I believe it's the best thing out there. It can change your life in ways that you wouldn't even believe, but you have to experience it and you have to be taught. And I would love the opportunity just to have a conversation, to talk about what's going on in your marriage, to talk about what's going on in your relationship. And if you want to talk about the program, see if we're a good fit, we can do that too. If not, that's okay. But if you'd like to take that step and learn a little bit more, please private message me and we'll get a call set up and see where that takes us. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Karen, and have a nice day, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.